Morning, everyone. Happy Mondays, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor and long-time politics supremo, Mr. Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason. And we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day. So get in the comments, ask us whatever's on your mind, and we'll do our best to help you out for you. Ask us your questions. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the wonderful May 17th reopening. Hurrah! Except it's just for now, apparently. Yet, after being locked down for 5 whole months, we can now hug each other, see people indoors, eat a restaurant meal, but perhaps not for long, with these pesky new variants wandering about the place. So last night, the PM told us to enjoy our new freedoms, but to do so, quotes, with a heavy dose of caution, which sort of takes the fun out of it. I can't quite imagine the Bullingdon Club ever told to do things with a heavy dose of caution when they were having a restaurant smash up. Now, Jason, if the Prime Minister's telling us to think twice about doing all the things he has announced that we can now do, should we be doing them at all?
This is a really good question. I mean, when the Prime Minister says the words act cautiously and responsibly, you think, who's the most kind of incautious, irresponsible person you know? It's probably Boris Johnson. But there seems to be a little bit of kind of shifting responsibility onto the shoulders of the public here, rather than the government taking responsibility itself. I think that's part of the problem. They promised us these freedoms. They're coming into force today. And you can understand if you're a pub owner, you've been an actor, you work in the theatre, you want to go and see your sports team in a ground in a live event for the first time in months, then this is a great day. And from that point of view, I completely get it. For businesses, this is make or break for them. They've waited a long time for this moment. And for somebody like me who sat outside a pub the other day and got hypothermia, I'm so pleased for the chance to go indoors. So all that is good. The problem is, it's coincided with this Indian variant, as you say, which, as Matt Hancock said, has the potential to spread like wildfire. That makes it very risky.
Exactly. So, there's some surveys in the Mirror today showing that only half of us actually wants to hug anybody else. The other half of us are quite cautious about doing it still. So despite the fact we've got these new freedoms, I think a lot of the country has been cautious for so long that it's very difficult to throw that off. There's a lot of people. I still haven't been to a pub. Mainly because I just don't have an opportunity and live in the middle of nowhere. And Susan says we want our lives back. We all want that, but there's an awful lot of us as well who are more cautious about it. And here we have 3, I assume, completely unvaccinated young ladies and some young chaps wandering back into a pub having a great time because they feel they're presumably not so much at risk now. The bar staff are happy. And of course, there's always a bar happy to have photographers in at midnight on a day when the restrictions ease because they get a bit of publicity. But Bal says, why should we be locked down anymore when rates are extremely low? And the answer to that, Jason, is because of the variant, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
It's pushing us most at risk.
It's as the kind of the Prime Minister described last week, we're in this race now between trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible and how quickly this Indian variant spreads. Now, there are some reports that the Indian variant could be transmit 60 times faster than any other variant. That's quite worrying. And yes, overall the country rates are very low, but there's about 1,300 cases of the Indian variant. It's in certain areas, Glasgow, Bolton, bits of London, Blackburn and Darwin, for example, a moment. Whether it can be contained is another matter. And it comes back to this big question is, are we doing this too early? It's a difficult balancing act between, as I said earlier, the trying to get, businesses need the custom, people want their freedoms back, as some of the comments have said earlier, but we've got public safety as well.
Exactly. And Andy says there, last year, cases were low and coming down. We reopened. What happened? They came back up again. Can we expect different now and why? Well, the argument, Andy, would be that the vaccines have changed some of that calculation, and a proportion of the population, a very large proportion, has a degree of protection now. But the AstraZeneca jab, which most of us have got, I'm getting my second dose in a week or two, is offering about 84% protection. So that means that of the millions of people who've had AstraZeneca and get both jabs, there will be millions of them who don't really have quite the same level of protection. And there's also huge numbers of people who either haven't been vaccinated yet or can't be vaccinated because they're too unwell or don't want to be vaccinated. And normally, if we're all vaccinated, that's the herd immunity. The rest of the herd keeps those people who are more vulnerable safe. And when some of them are not able to be protected, and if the new variant's coming in, those people that we should be protecting are going to be succumbing. And there's some suggestion that hospital admissions could reach 10 to 20,000 a day, which compares to about 3,500 at the height of the pandemic so far. So scientists are warning the next wave, if there is one, could be much worse. In short, Andy, no one knows whether this is going to be a good idea or not a good idea. But we do know, don't we, Jason, as Kevin Maguire reports in the paper today, and as you mentioned in your brilliant politics newsletter that everybody should be signing up to, 20,000 people travelled from India to the UK between April the 2nd and April the 23rd, when India's borders were finally closed after, not India's borders, sorry, our borders were finally closed to Indian travellers, which was, we were warned about at the time, potentially bringing with them this more contagious variant. So, Jason, how come the PM hasn't learned yet, after a year, he hasn't learned yet that viruses can travel across borders? Shouldn't he be taking back control by now?
This is, we need to kind of unpack this a bit, because there's quite a lot happened here. So Boris Johnson has been very keen to go to India for some time. He was meant to be going before Christmas. That got cancelled because of COVID. Then they put a new date in the diary for him to go in April. He wants to go because he wants to sign a post-Brexit trade deal. This is quite important. We need the custom after we've left the EU. The date was in the diary. Then they started hearing about this Indian variant. And the Indian variant was spreading not just in India, but to the neighboring countries of Pakistan and Bangladesh. So April the 9th, we put Bangladesh and Pakistan on the red list. That's countries, where you have to put very strict controls. If you travel to this country, you have to do 10 days in quarantine, etc., etc. But not India. And why didn't India go on the list? Now, the government's not really explained this, but all the fingers point suggests that Boris Johnson was reluctant to do this because he didn't want to offend Narendra Modi, because he was about to go and visit the country. Visit gets cancelled, India gets put on a red list. Now, as Kevin Maguire said in his article this morning, and that's 20,000 people from India came into the country in about a 2-week delay. Now, the scientists are saying that the Indian variant was probably going to arrive here anyway. But by not closing the borders in time, it got here a lot more quickly in much larger numbers. And if you're in a race between the vaccine and the variant, this obviously gave us a disadvantage. It's a big question about why they made this decision, or what didn't make the decision, why they delayed it.
Yeah, and of course, if he had gone to India, it's not just Boris Johnson, it's a whole retinue of people that would have gone and spoken to trade advisors from the other side as well, maybe journalists. He'd have got some lovely headlines out of it, post-Brexit headlines, and that's perhaps one of the things he didn't want to lose. Now, Lee says, if we can do what we can do now, then why mention about the new virus that's coming? So what? Do we then keep all things open now, or stay shut because it'll happen again anyway? Lee, there's lots to unpack there, but the first bit is commas, because it helps me read them back so much easier. The second one is that this is year 0 of a pandemic, right? It doesn't last a few months and then we're over it. It's year 0. And if you look at every pandemic in human history, we are doing better than previously. But whether it's the Black Death, the bubonic plague, or Spanish flu, they last for years, right? Years, because they travel around the whole world. Now, our vaccines give us a degree of protection, but at the end of this year, WHO reckons maybe about 1 billion people worldwide will be vaccinated in the wealthier parts of the world. That means there'll be 6 billion people unvaccinated, and in whom the virus will be circulating and evolving and mutating every day, several times a day perhaps, till eventually it throws up a variant which can get us all and get around the vaccines. And that's why this is going to keep on coming back, quite rightly, as you say, and we can't shut down thoroughly every time, but we do need to vaccinate everybody. It's that simple. Now, Shauna says, all I want to know is where did it come from? And if it's airborne, why wasn't it a thing before now? Jason?
Because like all vaccines, whether it's flu or coronavirus, they mutate, I'm afraid. So that they transmit in more or less the same way, but some are more kind of infectious than others. So, and this, the Indian strain, we've also got the Brazilian strain, we've got the Kent strain, we've got the South African strain. So there will be other variants, and this won't be the first or the last. This is something we have to live with, I'm afraid.
Exactly, and they're going to come from all over the world. They could come from within our own country.
Well, the good news is, as with flu, vaccines get updated as well as the new strains come along. So, I mean, we'll probably get to the situation where having a kind of an annual, or possibly even kind of twice annual, yearly kind of vaccine booster just become a norm. Just as you have an annual flu jab, it'll be exactly the same.
Exactly, but it's worth remembering still that COVID is much more deadly than the flu, and the flu itself brings our NHS to the knees every winter, so we don't need anything extra on that. Now, Mike says, morning, Mike. Johnson's never taken a decision over safety throughout the pandemic until the last possible second. Now, it's worth pointing out, isn't it, Jason, that Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland and Mark Drakeford in Wales, through this past year, have been more cautious than Boris Johnson has in England, and what they have done in Scotland and Wales when they are still imposing restrictions or putting restrictions back in has inevitably been followed at every step by England a couple of weeks later. It's because they're just more cautious than Johnson is. He doesn't want to do this kind of thing. But what are the chances, do you think, Jason, that in a fortnight the PM is going to be forced to give us some more bad news of the type they're already hearing in Scotland and Wales?
Yeah, I think there's two things here. One is Boris Johnson is notoriously indecisive. He always makes decisions right at the last moment. He kind of, he doesn't like having to commit himself. I think the other thing is what they haven't had so much in Wales and Scotland is we've got this very vociferous bunch of libertarian Tory MPs who don't want any form of lockdown at all and have resisted any measures to try and contain public health. In to answer your second question, Susie, about what are the chances? We don't know at this stage because we don't know how rash we are being in one kind of opening up the restrictions today when this variant's still floating around. If they can contain it, if the surge testing works, if they can get enough people vaccinated, and if enough people come forward to be vaccinated, which is the other problem they've got here, then it's possible that we can stick to the roadmap. But there's mixed messages coming from the government. Last Friday, Boris Johnson was saying there could be disruption and delay to the June the 21st full reopening. This morning, we have the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, saying he thought it was still on track. So who knows? Yeah.
Now, Shauna says people have tasted freedom again. If Boris was to lock down again, no one would listen. People are fed up with the backtracking. But Shauna, what he's done in the last 24 hours is to open up and then immediately backtrack, or at least take a step backwards and say we need to be cautious about this and not do too much. So I'm going to give you the freedom, but please don't use it. And the trouble with that is if he opens up and too many people get the infection, then he does have to lock down again. So this is the question. Should he be opening up at all at this stage if it is going to herald another lockdown, which nobody wants? And because, as you're quite right, there's a lot of virus fatigue out there, isn't there, Jason? People are getting really quite bored now. And there are people with a lot of problems as well. There's mental health problems that have got worse during the pandemic. There's people without jobs. There are 20,000 pubs still can't open up today, despite all the celebrations for other things. So, they're so confused in their messaging. What are the chances of anybody actually paying them attention, do you think?
Well, this is they always were concerned with right from the beginning about how long people would want to kind of abide by the restrictions. Actually, I think the public have been remarkably kind of cooperative and understanding, and I think they do get it. It's actually, if anything, the public have always been ahead of the government on this, and about what they are willing to do and the risks they're willing to take. But it doesn't help, as I say, once you kind of open the door to new freedoms, raise the expectations in that way, to then suddenly say, "Oh, sorry, we've got it all wrong." That's where
like Christmas, didn't we?
Yeah, as we saw over Christmas.
Exactly, at Christmas, yeah. Now, it's worth talking about. We're talking about some mixed messaging. The second story I want to talk about today, one of the things we're allowed to do is to head off on holiday. Now, sorry, Cliff, you raised this issue, that's why I'm moving on to it. Is opening up international travel a good idea? This is the question we're about to discuss. Up, and hooray, says the Mirror. Now, there are 5,000 people on planes today heading off to Portugal, apparently. Presumably, they're either older and they've been vaccinated, or they're younger and they don't have children who've got to stay in school. And they may possibly be joined by places like the Canary Islands on May the 30th. But in the style of Boris Johnson, Health Secretary Matt Hancock has urged people not to go to some countries they are allowed to go to unless it's really necessary, which is sort of the opposite of the official guidance, and it's not going to help with your travel insurance companies if you want a refund at all. So, Jason, when the government's being so confused in its messaging, what are the chances of anyone in the public either understanding what they're saying or paying them attention even?
Yeah, I mean, I do get this. Not everybody flying out the country is going on holiday. There's an awful lot of people who haven't seen their friends and their family for such a long time. You know, if you think how many people from the European Union live and work in Britain, and they, you know, for the first time now, they've got a chance to go back and see their family, introduce grandchildren to grandparents, etc. So it's not everybody going on holiday. So I understand why also looking at the weather outside my window at the moment, why people want a bit of sunshine. But the problem is you know, is it absolutely safe? And we've got the 12 countries on the green list. That's kind of, I can't remember all on the top of my head, but it's Iceland, Portugal, Gibraltar, Israel, Falkland Islands, St. Helena. Yeah, places we always go to every year.
Yeah. Very, very attractive, non-windy places. Yeah. Like St. Helena.
Lots of penguins, if you like penguins. And
yeah, and rather expensive to get to as well. Although there are flights to Faro apparently on offer for as little as $9.99. Although you do still have to pay for the tests. And it's worth pointing out there's social distancing when you get there. There's masks on beaches. There'll be police patrolling and issuing fines if you don't do things quite right. So, I mean, from the best point of view, I suppose, Matt Hancock and the government are trying to cover all the bases. They're saying, look, you can do these things, but just be careful, be cautious. Don't, as Jonathan Van Tam would say, you know, don't knock the bottom out of it. Just be calm. But is it working? As Abigail says, do you think it's going to lead to another lockdown in the end?
I wouldn't rule out another lockdown, but I think if we get to that stage, and it will depend a lot on the vaccination program, where it's going to be, a lot of the scientists are talking about the threat, the possibility, I wouldn't go stronger than that, of a kind of September, October winter surge like we saw last year. But on saying that, you know, it is very, very different. So many more people have been vaccinated. It's not a given at all that happen. But if the virus continues to mutate, if it continues to get new variants, then we can't rule it out.
Exactly. And international travel, perhaps even if you're vaccinated, it may be possible to transmit a new variant. We don't know at this stage. I'm sure we'll find out in the next few months, won't we? Exciting science experiment for us all.
I mean, I should tell you, the scientists have been out in force this morning. They had Professor Adam Finn from the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisation saying, you know, this is a very risky moment. Be careful, especially about kind of, you know, with the hugging. You've got Jeremy Farrar, a member of SAGE, also saying, you know, this we need to tread very carefully in the next few days. So, in answer to the previous question,
yeah,
a lot depends on how people behave.
Interestingly, the SAGE advice tends to get published well after it's been given, a few weeks. And I would just say, from what you've just said, from the top of my head, I would say that every time we've seen a lot of scientists coming out saying, "Oh, we're not sure about this," that's usually followed by the release of some SAGE advice that means the government was told not to do it at the time. And the reason the scientists are out now hitting the airwaves is because, you know, we told the government not to do this, just telling you now, be careful. When are we going to see the SAGE advice that's about this?
I don't know off the top of my head. It's been tended to come out kind of late on Friday afternoons, with the time lag between it being given has varied on different occasions. So I can't give you a precise answer.
They let it out when it's no longer guiding public policy, don't they?
Yeah, and with very little fanfare for some reason. I can't understand why they would be so coy about it.
Friday afternoon, how completely weird when everybody's already written the Sunday papers. Anyway, Victoria says, I understand people really want to go abroad and get some sunshine, but we'll be holding off for another year. I'll be more concerned about the planes and how long they've been grounded for. Are they safe? Oh, don't bring us another threat, Victoria. There's something else to worry about. We've got enough on our minds. We don't need to start thinking about the engine falling off as well, although I did have a nightmare about that last night. Andy says, I think the people going on holiday are selfish, and they'll be the ones who'll moan when we all go back in a full lockdown. It's worth pointing out, which is a phrase I keep saying today, but it's worth pointing out that the previous 2 waves of coronavirus in this country were seeded by foreign travel, weren't they, Jace? Both of them. First one, middle-class skiers in northern Italy. And the second one, middle-class holidaymakers in Spain in the summer. So middle-class people dashing to Portugal.
I think a lot of people will be agreeing with the comment which Paul it's put up. It's just disappeared now, saying summer holidays can wait until it's safe. I can, foreign holidays rather can wait until it's safe.
Yeah. Angela says, I'm pretty much writing off this year. Like last year, I think it'd be sensible for others to enjoy small freedoms now and look towards next year for more normality. Yeah, I think you're right, aren't you, Jason? The general public are fairly common sense about this. Paul, my holiday's in the garden and we're happy with that.
And we're coming too, Paul.
Yeah, we're all coming round. Can you bring Lanzarote with you as well?
It's a big garden.
But it's a case of most people are sensible. We want to do the right thing. We want to have our families, but most people realise this is a several-year project. This isn't a quick thing. Liz, she's on her way to the Algarve. Stuff it, says Liz. I want a holiday, and that's that. I'd like to remind everybody at this stage that there is no human right to a sunshine break in a foreign place. That's just you wanting it, as opposed to having a right to it. You have a right to a break from work and anything else. So keep asking us your questions. Are you going off on holiday? Do you think it's a good idea that we should be opening up? Are you happy to go to the pub? Are you happy to go to the pub indoors in our current weather, as most people would be? But we do have a bit of good news to give you. And just before we get to it, though, I want to tell you one quick thing. There's a poll in the end of this travel piece by which found that half of people thought they'd be covered by their travel insurance if the government advice changed. And 47%, almost half, thought that if Britain locked down again, they'd be covered by their travel insurance. But analysis of 73 travel insurance providers found that sort of cover was very rare. They have rewritten the terms and conditions since last year, folks. Read the small print if you do book to go abroad, please. Now, let's tell you some good news, because there is some. Or at least it's good news if you're called Wembley. Now, when Leicester City made an FA Cup final appearance in 1963, one fan, who's remained nameless, decided to name his new baby daughter after the stadium. Now, unfortunately, they lost 3-1. But for more than half a century, Wembley Leicester Harrop, aged 57, has waited in vain for her name to count for victory. They lost again to Man City 6 years after that. But finally yesterday, after beating Chelsea 1-0, her name has finally become a good luck charm, which is nice for her anyway, and possibly her dad if he's still around. But Jason, is this a lesson to us all, do you think, in persistence and hoping for the best? Because she could have changed her name by now and she didn't. Or is it perhaps choosing our children's names more carefully?
I think it's lovely. I was so pleased Leicester won. I was watching it, and when Chelsea equalised, I walked out of the room in dismay because I was so upset, because you wanted Leicester to win, didn't you? Because Chelsea are just the worst team ever. And then I had to go back in and I found that they'd been ruled out by VAR. So I'm really happy for Wendy Leicester Harrop, and I'm really happy for all football fans.
Yes, wonderful
But
bit of
I
news.
did think this could set a dangerous trend of naming children after football grounds, because you don't really want to do that, do you?
No, you know what? I'm with the French on this. They've got rules. They've got laws about what you cannot name your children. And I would say that calling your child Wembley really should be against the law. But Leicester City, if anyone there's watching, here's your new mascot. Get her out there. Get her on the pitch. Get her, make the most of her while you've got her for the next sort of 12 months before you lose the cup again. And celebrate having Wembley, for goodness sake. She's there and she's ready to help. One more question then. I think we've got a few more before we sign off. Abigail, I've been off work for 7 months now. I work at the pub. It's affected my mental health. Does the government have any plans to help people such as me, or will it be for the privileged as normal? Abigail, the issues with mental health provision in this country are woeful. The fact that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, keeps going out, he was doing this on Friday, I think, repeatedly saying we've protected people's incomes. He's protected some people's incomes, and some of them are multi-millionaire people who are mates of the Tory party who've all been given PPE contracts, including the vile Brooks Newmark, which I found out today, the 180 million he got for a PPE contract. I'd love to say yes. I'd love to say you get some help. I don't think it's very likely. Jason, have you heard anything about?
I just think Abigail's raised such an important point, and it is this. What we were talking about right at the beginning, it's this difficult balancing act between public safety and health and containing the virus with people like Abigail, who being out of work off work, has been really hard. And, she's not alone. That doesn't make it necessarily any easier. So I'm full of sympathy, for people in Abigail's situation. And I really get it. And, but it is, it's, what more can the government do? I mean, as you say, there are 3 million people who didn't get any support at all. They're primarily kind of self-employed and small businesses. But it was, so it's been a really difficult time.
Yeah, and the fact that we recognise that is probably not helping very much. It's a shame that the government doesn't. Now, Eva says, I'm not asking about holidays. I'm angry that compulsory COVID testing involved in returning to the UK after my current visit to my dying father in an EU country will cost me about £300 in total, plus the flight cost. Why is the government handing out COVID tests for free on a daily basis, but those who travel are forced to pay so much? I think I'm right in saying that they're different tests. The free tests that are handed out are lateral flow tests, and the ones you have to do on the way back are like the gold standard PCR tests. But I'm with you, Eva. I would say that the government should be subsidising, if not handing out those PCR tests for free. If they want people to travel, they've got to help in some way. And if people in your situation who aren't, as Jason pointed out earlier on, not going on holiday,
some of the travel companies are doing discounted tests. I discount price for tests. So, but it doesn't help even in her situation. But that is,
If you got some package holidays, I think some flights, check the small print because some of them are offering cheaper tests on there. But it's not good for anybody. Wendy, morning, Wendy. Why blame Boris? He didn't invent the virus. It don't matter. Wiz running the country. No one will get this right. Don't matter who's running the country. That would be absolutely correct. If, Wendy, every nation on planet Earth had exactly the same story to tell, right? Then it wouldn't matter who was running the place. Just the virus is doing the virus's thing. Unfortunately, it's also not the fact we're old and fat either. The oldest population on Earth is in Japan, and they've had far fewer deaths because they're an island nation. They closed their borders. The fattest nation on Earth is the Cook Islands in the Pacific, and they've had, last time I checked, 0 deaths because they're an island nation and they closed their borders. Now, just going to throw this out there, Wendy, but we're an island nation and we could have closed our borders. That would have helped. And I did think we'd elected a prime minister who was going to take back control of the borders. He seems to have not bothered. Now, Mike says, it's reported today over 35s are now eligible for the jab. All we can do is get as many of our people vaccinated and minimise the chances of variants coming in. A nice note to end on, Jason, and he's right, isn't he?
Yes, and actually we have really good take-up rates of the vaccine compared to most other countries. It's been, the vaccine skeptics are small, but unfortunately there is a little a size-worth number of them. And the key now is persuading people who have not yet taken up the vaccine to get that jab. That is where all the effort should be focused on.
Exactly. Kerry's 35. She's had her first jab yesterday. Welcome to the First Jab Club, Kerry. And if there's anybody out there who is thinking about whether they should get the jab, I've had my first one. Have you had one, Jason?
I've had the first. Wait a second. And yes, I did have symptoms, by the way.
I had some symptoms the first day. Yep. But I'm all better the day after that. And just shows that you've got an immune system.
24 hours. It's fine.
Exactly. It shows you've got an immune system and it's working. It's doing what it's supposed to. So absolutely fine with that. And I have recently had to buy a computer and it wasn't a Microsoft one. So I don't think Bill Gates is involved with anything. I think we're okay. Okay, our last question then. Andy, if you've not had your second jab and they want you to take it in 8 weeks instead of 12 and then say you won't have protection, can I still take my second jab in 12 weeks instead of having it earlier? Yes, you can. I don't think it does affect your level of protection, Andy. I don't think that's right, actually. They were saying to start with, you shouldn't wait as long as 12 weeks. It was going to be 2, remember. So whenever they offer you the second jab, you say yes, right? Anybody asks you if you want a vaccine, you say yes. That's it. And then we can stop having these conversations, can't we, Jason, about whether we're going to lock down and whether the Prime Minister could do a better job, which would make all of us happier, I think. Right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for joining us, Jason. And I think we're seeing you all again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye.